Hi, my name is Shannon. This presentation is on the adolescent brain and the digital age, neurobiological and psychological effects of social media and technology. So this presentation outlines how technology and social media affect adolescent mental health, brain development, and behavior. The purpose of this is to inform parents and community members about social media and how they can protect adolescents' mental health and their children's use of technology. So an overview of what this presentation is about is the neurological outcomes, the psychological outcomes, any risks for vulnerable youth, and protective factors and solutions that we as parents can work together or individually to achieve within our families or externally within our community. So this slide is particularly important. This is the adolescent brain. So here, as you see in the front, we have the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for emotional regulation, judgment, and intense emotions. This part of the brain is not fully formed until age 20 to 25, and it continues developing actually until 25. Over here specifically, we have the limbic system. This is a lower part of the brain, and this is responsible for emotions and how your body feels and experiences emotions. This is developed in early adolescence. However, specifically, how a response is felt emotionally can be triggered from the limbic system. So the limbic system is often called the reward system. So the reward system triggers the prefrontal cortex. So this is important to note because in the adolescent brain, these structures are not fully developed and don't appear the same as they do in the adult brain. So until someone's about 25 years old, these structures are not fully formed. So here we're still going to continue to talk about the developing teen brain. So social media is designed to trigger rewards. The emotions are from the limbic system, and the responses are from the prefrontal cortex, which is still developing. So to just sum up the previous slide, but also build upon it, we're going to talk about the prefrontal cortex. So this is responsible for decision making, impulse control, planning ahead, and emotional regulation. The limbic system is responsible for stronger emotional responses, increased sensitivity to rewards, and greater desire for approval. So in adolescence now we can see that children who have strong emotional responses, as they do, their prefrontal cortex is still developing. So they will have less emotional regulation. They'll be less able to emotionally control themselves. There'll be more increased sensitivity to rewards. So lots of times, parents and teachers use rewards to positively reinforce certain behavior or modify behavior in children and adolescents because a very small reward has a very big reaction. And this is also controlled by the limbic system. And then finally, there's a greater desire for approval. So as we know, teens and adolescents, peer approval is everything and very external. So a lot of the emotions that they're receiving are coming from their peer group, which is being authorized through the limbic system. This causes adolescents to be more vulnerable to risk-taking behaviors, habit formation, social comparison, and emotional reactivity. So now we can kind of see how the brain works together as a puzzle with the social and emotional environment of adolescence and how social media can impact that. So The reward system. So the limbic system is the reward center of the brain, which, as you can see over here on the upper left-hand photo, that blue area is an area of the limbic system. We're going to talk about dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's involved in motivation, rewards, and learning. It's a chemical released from nerve cells in the brain and received by other nerve cells. And it helps to reinforce behaviors in the brain that are perceived as rewarding. So anytime someone is receiving an emotional or external reward, it's releasing dopamine, and dopamine is traveling through the brain and you're getting a neurological response. Okay, and as you can see, if you look at the upper left-hand picture here, the dopamine travels right to our friend, the prefrontal cortex, which is where emotional regulation, decision making, and higher cognitive reasoning are all found and still developing in adolescence. Okay, so social media rewards are triggers through likes, comments, notifications, new messages, follower increases, and endless scrolling. Okay, this is a variable reward pattern, which means there will not always be a reward every time someone's checking their social media. There might not always be a comment or a like. This actually makes the influence of the pattern of checking more consistent and increases checking. This is called a variable reward pattern, and this is used as behavior modification. So children and parents use it on children, teachers use it on children, therapists use it, even training animals. The variable reward pattern is used. Now we're going to look here down at the lower left-hand picture, the dopamine loop. So first you have the cue. The cue is the person thinking they have possibly a notification or any type of reward that could be waiting for them. This increases neurological quote unquote cravings, which is your brain craving for the dopamine hit. This triggers the checking behavior. So the adolescent or person will pick up their phone, look at the phone, and see if there is yet a reward. The reward is the response, the likes, the followers, the hearts, etc. And reward systems are highly active during adolescent development, and self-regulation systems are still developing. So this is very influential because an adolescent, although they might have the craving like an adult, and the adult could possibly stop the response through self-control, where an adolescent will have less ability to do that due to the prefrontal cortex not being fully developed. Furthermore, peer approval is especially meaningful during these adolescent years. So an adolescent is going to automatically be looking for peer approval, and this can be found instantaneously through social media, or they could be harmed through social media, and thus it will affect them. So some of the outcomes are the frequent checking habits, difficulty stopping use, reduced tolerance for boredom. So children will constantly say, or adolescents will say, they're constantly bored, and it's because their dopamine hits are not constantly being hit. Increased distraction, and emotional dependence on the device, because they'll be looking for the peer support through the technology, through their phone, through the social media. So this sums up why social media and technology are so addictive and hard to put down. So now we're going to touch on attention span in the digital age. So focus, multitasking, and executive function. So what is executive function? Executive function comes a lot from the executive part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, where all your higher cognitive functioning is coming from. So here you'll learn your attention span. You'll have a sustained attention. Your working memory will be developed. Your organization is being developed. Your task completion is being developed. Like we mentioned earlier, impulse control is being developed, and your prioritization of tasks. So as an adolescent, you don't fully have executive function formed. You're learning it, it's developing. And so, like anything that's being developed, it's being molded. And what's molding it is the limbic system, which is causing the emotional response, which is helping to shape the prefrontal cortex. So, how social media and technology interrupt focus. So, constant notifications, switching between apps, multitasking during homework, short form rapid content, and habitual phone checking. So, we talked about habitual phone checking earlier with the dopamine and the dopamine loop. We talked about the notifications and the dopamine loop. Switching between apps is something technology offers. Multitasking during homework is a danger because the brain is trying to focus on the schoolwork, but also is procrastinating. And is procrastinating possibly peer influence? Because as we noted before, peer influence is very important in adolescence. And finally, short form rapid content. Social media has very short segments, about 15 seconds each, especially if you're scrolling through Instagram, of information. And it's very rapid, it's very fast, and it's very concentrated. The prefrontal cortex is being hit with that for 15 seconds, and then a scroll happens, and then there's a new slide, and it's being hit for 15 seconds. This over time is causing short attention spans. It's causing an increase in distractibility, and it's increasing frustration. Adolescents will sit and do their homework, and they will be conditioned to only look at things for short periods of time, and they'll be so frustrated and emotionally upset. It's easier for them to put that down to the side and focus on something else. And that can affect self-esteem as well. So the adolescent outcomes are reduced concentration, difficulty completing assignments, lower frustration tolerance, procrastination, and increased distractibility. So now we're going to get into the aspect of technology. So why sleep is critical in adolescence? Well, you are probably thinking, why did I say technology and then talked about sleep? Well, screens disrupt sleep. Blue light delays melatonin release. Late night scrolling delays bedtime. Notifications interrupt sleep. And emotional content increases arousal before sleep. So why is sleep critical in adolescence? Well, an adolescent brain actually needs more sleep than an adult brain because the brain is still growing and it's still developing. Memory is being consolidated. The prefrontal cortex is understanding and processing emotional regulation. Learning and academic performance are being assimilated. Physical health and immune functions also run powerfully off of the level of sleep that we receive. Between 2003 and 2013, U.S. teens slept less than 8 hours, and that rose by 24%. So over a period of time, decreased sleep equals decreased performance, equals decreased attention span, decreased emotional regulation, decreased academic performance. So sleep is very important, and the blue light delays the melatonin release. The late night scrolling delays bedtime, and the notifications and emotional content decrease the ability to get a good night's sleep. Okay, so we've talked about sleep. So how can we help the adolescents? What can we do? Well, this is about patterns, outcomes, and protective habits for adolescents and evening digital use. So common evening patterns that could negatively impact adolescent sleep is phone use in bed, falling asleep with the phone on or near the bed, the late night checking of social media, falling asleep with devices close enough that they can be reached, and waking up to notifications. The outcomes obviously are increased irritability, increased anxiety and depressed mood, reduced level of concentration, lower academic performance, and increased impulsivity. So what can we do to protect adolescent sleep? Well, create a device-free bedtime routine. Keep cell phones out of the bedroom. Limit cell phone use before bed. Charge phones outside of the bedroom. Have a consistent sleep schedule that children know, adolescents know, this is the routine, and at this time phones are away, and that's it. And also, it can help to reduce screen time before bed for at least 30 to 60 minutes before you put your head on the pillow. So next we have social comparison and anxiety in the digital environment. Okay, so what is social comparison? It's comparing appearances, success, or lifestyle to others. It's based on online data that's usually edited. Very rarely is it not. And adolescents can internalize these standards. So as an adolescent is looking at a friend's profile or scrolling, they are comparing themselves to what the other person has, what the other person looks like, and if they're missing out, fear of missing out of something fun. So, and that brings us to the next point. So anxiety about being excluded or left behind, and pressure to stay constantly connected, fear of missing social interactions and trends. So this is paramount for adolescents, really, because as we know from the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, both of those centers from the brain are being significantly influenced here. Adolescents already have a fear of missing out. They already seek social interaction and want to feel connected. So if they're scrolling or they're on social media and they're comparing themselves to others, their prefrontal cortex has to learn how to manage those emotions. And those emotions are hard to control because the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So you'll see validation-seeking behaviors like monitoring likes, comments, and followers, seeking peer approval online, following trends, and a lot of emotional reactions tied to online feedback. So this can increase anxiety in adolescents, and it lowers self-esteem, can create body image concerns. You'll find a lot within the eating disorder community about body image and how social media impacts body image, social stress, emotional dependency, but also validation. Adolescents will want to fit in. So in order to do so, they will join trends that will help them to feel the validation, which increases the emotional dependency on their peer group, which is through social media. So depression, isolation, and emotional well-being, these are three pillars of what a parent and a community should stay on top of for adolescents, because you need to be able to understand signs of emotional distress. And understanding those can really help a parent or a community member look out for adolescents behavior that's dangerous or harmful to them, and also help us as a community to help each other and our adolescents. So we know how social media affects mood: constant comparison to others, exposure to negative or distressing content, a pressure to appear perfect online, and emotional dependence on validation. So social connection versus social isolation. So social media increases connection for some youth, but it's not always person to person. It's through a screen. Excessive use reduces face-to-face interactions, and online interaction does not always replace the emotional support that adolescents need for growth and development. So signs of emotional distress are withdrawal from activities, changes in mood or sleep, loss of interest in hobbies, increased sadness or irritability, and feelings of loneliness and isolation. So adolescents will not want to partake in things they used to want to. They'll be grumpier, have a harder time getting to sleep, staying asleep. They'll lose interest in things they used to like. They'll feel sad and they'll be irritable, and they'll feel lonely. And all this goes on, coincides with isolation. And there's research findings that show that increased screen time brings on higher depressive symptoms, increased anxiety, and just generally a lower life satisfaction in some adolescents. I mean, it must be very draining to compare yourself to others when people only post perfect things online, and it's very stressful for adolescents to try to have to live up to that. And of course, they want to fit in with their peers. So this gets into the social media comparison cycle diagram, which to me, I hope that you find this helpful, but I find it particularly helpful. So a teen compares themselves to online personalities and peers. They realize internally, or they feel that their life doesn't measure up to that. So they then experience isolation and they feel emotionally neglected because they can't fit in with their peers. This causes them to have a negative mood, to be isolated, depressed, and anxious. And their coping mechanism for this is more online escapism. Sometimes adolescents will continue to go on social media, and other times they'll continue to go on social media, but they'll also find other avenues online of things that are matching their internal negative mood. So they could also find other harmful content online because they're not feeling very good inside themselves. So as more online escapism happens, there continues the cycle. Teen comparison to online personalities and peers, and the cycle goes round and round. In the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, as well as in the Surgeon General's warning on social media and adolescence, evidence suggests social media contributes to emotional distress for some adolescents, particularly when used in excessive, comparison-based, or associated with online experiences. This is important to note. So before we briefly discussed body image, but this is about self-esteem, body image, and identity development. So an important consideration is that positive online communities can also support identity exploration and belonging for some youth. So in some cases, the online communities can be supportive, but parents must be sure about the community that the adolescent is in to make sure that it's a safe community and it's a supportive community. So we start here, adolescence and identity formation. Adolescence is a critical stage for self-discovery, confident development, social identity formation, and emotional growth. And that all makes sense because the prefrontal cortex is still developing. You are still developing until you're in your mid-20s. Social media and appearance culture. So lots of exposure is edited. There's filtered images, unrealistic beauty standards, influence culture, which causes comparison, which is really, it's unfair. And it's also there's a pressure to appear always attractive or successful, which is very unrealistic. Validation and self-worth. So likes and comments become linked to self-esteem and self-worth. So an adolescent at this stage is developing their identity, and instead of it coming internally from themselves, so their ability to look in the mirror and say, I'm proud of who I am, is coming from peer support and the emotional dependency of social media. Online feedback may influence confidence and identity. So as an adolescent, if your identity is being developed from outside of yourself, then you yourself don't have control of it when you are old enough and your prefrontal cortex is developed to say, oh, I'm going to stop the external influences from telling me I'm, not enough, or I can't be compared to this person. So possible psychological outcomes. So low self-esteem, body dissatisfaction, anxiety, especially based around appearance, social pressure, and of course, identity confusion. So now we're going to talk about vulnerable populations and digital inequality. So some adolescents face greater online risks and higher vulnerability. That may exist, especially if they find that their community is mostly online. So some of these groups could be the LGBTQIA+ youth, certain racial and ethnic minorities, adolescents with anxiety or depression, youth who are experiencing or have experienced trauma or bullying, and lower socioeconomic populations. So second, we have some online challenges that are pretty common. So cyberbullying and harassment, the discrimination and hate speech, social exclusion, pressure to conform to dominant culture standards in order to fit in with peers, exposure to harmful content, and digital inequality. So less parental supervision due to caregivers' work demands, reduced access to mental health, limited digital literacy education, and unequal access to safe online spaces. So as parents and community members, we need to focus on what does digital literacy mean? What does this mean in our home, for ourselves and our family, but also in our community? So some algorithmic and representation concerns are beauty standards often reflect dominant cultural ideals. Algorithms may amplify harmful or extreme content, and marginalized identities may be underrepresented or represented inaccurately because the algorithm is pushing those forward. So here we have our risks versus protective factors. So the risks include cyberbullying, discrimination, isolation, and harmful algorithms. But how can we as parents and community members protect our children and adolescents? We can find supportive communities. We can build supportive communities through digital literacy and having conversations with other people about this. We can navigate access to mental health, encourage adolescents to look at mental health and not look down on the fact that mental health is what drives adolescent emotional growth and security. And we can also make sure that we communicate with trusted adults, but make sure that trusted adults are within our community so we can navigate the community as pillars of foundation for protection for our youth and adolescents. So, some protective factors and healthy media habits. So, healthy digital habits for adolescents. This is something that parents can do at home. And it's important because telling you all of this, explaining all of these things to you, I have to share things that can also help, give you some sort of safety and something you feel like you can grab to when advocating for your children. So this is what this is. These are called protective factors to build healthy social media habits. All right. So first we have setting screen time boundaries. Second, taking breaks from social media. 3, prioritizing sleep and physical activity. 4, being mindful about media use. So mindfulness in media use comes from parents understanding and allowing their children to share and explain what they see and experience through media and being open to what they hear, not shutting it down. If a child feels comfortable sharing their experience on social media and what's happening with them, a parent can help cultivate that safe environment that can encourage the child to learn mindfulness about their media use. Parents can also encourage face-to-face interaction. So as parents, there's a lot of important involvement that goes on. You have to be open in communication about online experiences. You yourself have to role model healthy habits. You create family plans surrounding media, and you monitor age-appropriate content. These are all very important things that parents can do to help adolescents and children using social media and technology. So specifically, policy advocacy and school-based interventions are something in community that parents can get involved in. It doesn't have to be something like signing up for for like a PTA meeting. It can be something as small as sharing awareness verbally with other people if it comes up in topic. So you can do that in their school supports, so digital literacy education, mental health awareness programs, and of course, for policy advocacy here in the state of Connecticut, Bill HB 5035, which moves to remove cell phones actually from schools and hopes to decrease cell phone use and distractions. And also there's in Connecticut HB 5037, which moves to increase parental controls, decrease addictive platforms, and increase privacy policies. I'll link all these below if anybody's interested in learning about them and advocating for them. So another bit of protective factors for mental health is strong family relationships, strong boundaries in families surrounding social media use, supportive peer connections, extracurricular activities, and access to counseling and support services. Now, strong family relationships, even if you come from a multi-family home, this doesn't mean that you've been set up for failure. It just means that in your home stronghold, you have the relationship with your children that you do have conversations about boundaries with social media, and that you do provide those boundaries within your home and are consistent with it. See, technology is not inherently harmful, but healthy use, boundaries, and education are, especially with social media and technology use in the digital age. So, supporting adolescents in the digital age. Adolescence is a critical period of brain development. Social media influences mental health, sleep, attention span, self-esteem, as well as social behavior. So protective strategies matter, which we discussed earlier. Parental involvement, healthy boundaries, digital literacy, school and community support, and mental health awareness. If you're interested in real-world support, Connecticut General Assembly Bill HB 5037, which I mentioned before, moves to increase parental controls, decrease addictive properties in social media, and increase privacy protections for children. Connecticut General Assembly Bill HB 5035 decreases classroom distractions and improves student focus on learning and prevents cyberbullying, allowing for a safer and more consistent learning environment. This would be removal of cell phones and technology from the classroom unless there were special needs for it, an emergency, or of course any technology that is provided by the school for educational purposes. And I will link the information on these below, as well as the representatives and legislators if you're interested in reaching out to them and sharing your stories or giving them any feedback, as it could help them, give them wind under their wings. So finally, I really just want to thank you for your time. You know, protecting youth and their mental health is so important. The youth are our future. And what we teach them is the gift that we give them to carry forward in life. So taking the time to listen and learn about ways to help our children is important. And so I really want to thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. And I hope that you've found this presentation helpful. If you have any questions, I will link all of my information. I have resources if you would like to reach out to me, and if you'd like to share your stories or any comments, I'm more than happy to make myself available. Below is a link for the bills and the names of the legislators, as well as their contact information. And if you'd like to reach out to them to continue to support our youth, that would be extremely amazing. But if you don't, it's understandable. I hope you got as much out of this presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day. These next two slides are my resources. If you would like to look over them, then you may scroll through, and you can also pause the screen and screenshot them if you like.